Yes, so the subject is actually quite interesting, code to product, because indeed it's a difficulty. Code is one thing, and making it used by people and then be able to evolve it to product status is a much more complex endeavor. So I'm not sure, you want to go in the discussion right now, or?
Well, the question really is, okay, you say it's a good thing, so it means it's something that you'll be confronted with regard to having development done by the community, and you as a private company having to take this to the market.
Yeah.
So that's the job.
Yeah, so actually we have a bit two different, we can have two different situations in the case of open source project. You have the situation where you have people that create some code and actually even create a product, so, or this code is used, libraries or products are created right away, and then the community grows around it, and then the question is more about how to potentially sustain it over the long term. Potentially as a business. And then you have the case, and we're more in the second case, where I had an idea of something that would be interesting, and the idea was to write code and at the same time think about how it's going to be sustainable in the future. And so in this second case, it's particularly important to think about the users very early on. So what are their needs, what are they looking for, and to not think as much in technical terms. What is the code itself? It's more about what is the need. So you need to put the usage as strongly as the code itself, and what the code does, and talk to end users. And one thing I learned while starting to present XWiki is that users don't really care about open source or not open source. They care about getting solutions. They care about getting something that works. Open source can be an argument that you add on top of it, but first you need to solve the problem. So you first need to solve the problem, and then you can add open source as a differentiator. But you cannot just come and say, oh, it's open source, you're going to take my stuff.
Okay. Yeah,
it doesn't work like that, and clearly, and you need to look at what alternate solutions there are, and what is your competition, whatever it is, open source, not open source. And you can be helped by people that think that open source is very important, and they will favor open source solution always, but even when they favor open source solution, they will still want a very good solution. You can, in our domain, for example, we're doing wikis, well, and everybody knows Atlassian and Jira Conference are used by many open source believers because they're very good tools, and you need to be as good, and you need at least to be as good. I mean, and we're getting compared a lot with Conference, and we need to be very good. So first, you need to think about your users and what they need, and solve what they need.
Thank you, Ludovic. I think I'll ask Cedric Carbone, another of the participants with an experience in startups and small companies pushing products to the market. What's your take on this perspective?
So for sure, my take, as Ludovic said, is to learn from the user. What we can see is usually, let's say, proprietary software, closed source software, organize customer advisory board, organize a physical event. Where I think on the open source market, we have more online community, because internet has no border, let's say, so it's come from everywhere, and usually we have less, let's say, budget in sales or marketing, so we are trying more to leverage internet and to leverage online tools. So I think when a company launch open source project, open source product, they should also organize, try to organize also a physical event and try to have, let's say, a direct access to users. So it's perhaps where we can be less good as a closed source. But I think to let's say, get feedback, have online survey, have bug report from the users, understand the users, open source community are very good for that.
Thank you. Now I think the next speakers will represent more systems integrators. I will ask Roger from his experience at Atos as head of open source in the public sector, looking at resources from the open source world. Some of this software is halfway baked sometimes, and you probably have some experience with regard to selecting open source software or resources.
Yeah, first of all, Atos is system integrator, so we use open source. We don't really contribute. So, and that is a bad thing, okay? That is clear. And so we take advantage of open source. But from our perspective, I think that we need to divide in three categories. I used to say we have code for humanity, means code everybody can access. Basically, Apache Foundation is a good place of code for humanity. And then we have something we call fair business code. I mean, you can share it, you can use it, but you need to at least grant the one who built this code. And the last one is what we call pure business code. So from Atos, we're more interested about code for humanity. Basically, we want code we can reuse, integrate, and package, and resell. So my point here is more about, I hear a lot of stuff about code. So open source is not really make any sense anymore from the business perspective. As I say, Kubernetes integrate Docker, and for so far, Docker is not part of Google. So, and I hear also that you have integration with Swarm or different other containers. So the notion of open source is very, very relative. I'm more thinking about what you do with the code. That's the purpose. So I'm more care about code for humanity, to be honest, than business code. But I know that you guys need to make money with your code, so that is also something important.
Cool, thank you. Gabriele, you also represent a large system integrator, but as innovation director, you are in the job of producing software that will end up as product or resources in big projects. So what's your take on the theme, code to product?
Yes, engineering group is both a system integrator and a producer of software like Spago BI, for instance. So looking at the two speeches of this morning, moving from code to product is not an easy task for companies. Probably it's just a task for major companies. It's interesting to see that Google, that doesn't need a community out of Google, joined the Linux Foundation for Kubernetes. So also a major company, in some way, to enlarge the community, needs the help of an initiative of a foundation of a community, a larger open source community. The second speech of Wheeler is different. They give some tools for the awareness of the open source code. That is for quality in general, but security, specific security, like Oscar initiative, I can say, in OW2. Just to say that I agree, a system integrator has to make business, so want safe code. Sometimes in proprietary field, but in the open source field, you want to have a reputation, a user community, and the security, to be safe that the software is secure or of the good quality. And that's the role of the community in helping companies moving from code to products. I think that is a very difficult task for a company to make this job by itself. Of course, you are in charge of making your product successful because you have your goal and you want to reach your user, but the community can help to give the awareness, to enlarge the community, and to help you in the governance, to give the rules of the game, I can say, that is license, but also the governance of the projects. And these are two interesting, different examples. A company that joined Linux Foundation for a topic that in the hype, Docker, Kubernetes is very popular now, so you don't need to say where are we going, but you give something different to give security, safety on the existing code.
David, where do you see what you do at the Core Infrastructure Initiative and the badge program? How do you see the badge program contributing to improving software all along the value chain?
Well, one thing I didn't emphasize enough, I think, is that certainly I agree that products are much more than just some code. Testing, documentation, all those things are necessary for users to actually get value out of that software. And we do have some criteria about documentation and so on. I think one challenge that we have is that, in my mind, products should focus on user. What are the user needs? And different kinds of users require different kinds of things. Someone who is developing software that is fundamentally a JavaScript library, the users are frankly other software developers. They have needs, and they're users, but their needs are very, very different than, say, a user of VLC or Firefox or LibreOffice, which are used directly by end users, and they have very, very different kinds of needs. Same with enterprise software. Enterprise software has needs, absolutely, as users, and those users' needs are radically different. And I guess I would just appeal, I think the criteria can help in terms of identifying you need tests. Yes, you need code, you need tests, you need documentation. But you also have to focus on the end user, and that's going to be very specific to the kind of software, or the kind of problem you're solving, the kind of users that you have.
Yeah, so I'll ask Craig, do you see yourself as providing the market a product, or is it more an online service or something? Is the product the code itself and what goes along with it, or is it the service or the way you can use it online?
We have product managers for Kubernetes as an open source thing, and then separately for the hosted version of it. And so ultimately, the altruism behind Kubernetes is we think the more people who can use this thing, the more dollars are going to come to our hosting business. It's very obvious from that regard. But in saying that, to what a few people have mentioned before, now with the rise of software as a service, there are a lot of people who are just saying, well, it doesn't, I'm an open source house, but I'm fine with running on GitHub. And if you remember a few years ago, Launchpad, there was this thing, well, Launchpad's not open source, we can't host everything there, but do we care about GitHub, for example? The convenience of these things is one thing, and some companies who have adopted Kubernetes, I think, will just use it, whereas other people have said to me that they become committers on whatever it is that they adopt because they care about knowing they can change things. To the supportability thing, it's like if you have a commercial package, then generally you hope or you trust the vendor will stay in business. If you have a good open source community, you can trust that even if the primary maintainer went away, then someone else would hopefully step in, and the more people use a thing, which is one, like, to why we set up a foundation. I think it is because we want this to be not, like, there are many single vendor things. And if you are a single vendor, you make a nice piece of plumbing. Docker is a great example of this. They built a very nice piece of plumbing, but there's no money in plumbing. It's not sexy, and they need end-user focused things, so they're trying to move further up the value chain without, like, they moved away from the hosting piece. So they're trying to productize something which is in large part behind the scenes, and it isn't end-user facing. So we can see the difference between those two things, I think.
Thank you. So you've mentioned product managers, the role as product manager. It's funny because this is something we don't really think of when you think of a community and developing software and contribution. When we mention contribution, we talk about code contribution, bug reports, feature requirements, etc., translation and all this. But product management, it's not something that appears as a role in the community. Maybe it should, actually. Cedric, you've been in a couple of startups. What is the key, what key quality in this kind of product management or moving the code towards the stages of product? What would be the key quality or key task you would highlight?
Yeah, I think it's a good point to highlight the need of product manager also in open source product, because at the end it's a product, so it should fit with the market. So for sure you should listen your users, but it's also good, let's say, to have link with analysts that know better than you, perhaps the market, or that can give you, let's say, another overview. So you should absolutely invest in product marketing also for an open source product. And at Talent, at Nanocloud, we do open source product, but we also invest, let's say, to learn where we should go, how it should go. You should do some marketing. It's very important. So for me, open source software is it's a product at the end. So open source or not open source is the same. So the product manager should, at the same time, take care to the community, to the users, to the customers that pay to use the software. So after there is several model for open source, for sure, for companies that produce open source. But at the end you have community user, you have let's say enterprise users that are paying to use the software, or that can be have some let's say help from professional services to use the software, and you should have a product manager that take care about all this input, and also the internal input about I don't know, sales guys in the company, and not only the R&D. Usually on open source project, we, let's say, listen only developers that build the product, and we don't listen too much other persona.
Okay, Ludovic, you wanted to add something, and then Gabriele.
Yeah, there is one thing is you said open source, not open source is the same thing for you need a product manager. I agree with that. You need a product manager. However, the role of the product manager is indeed goes a bit beyond, and it's in this, because in the end it's indissociable. You cannot split what you do in terms of what product you build from the business model. And so the product manager needs to be very aware of the business model of the company, and he needs to work on both sides. He needs to work on the part that is open source, that is free, and on the eventual part that bring money, whatever it is. Whether your business model is service or your business model is a packaged product, or he needs to be aware of that, because in what will be done, you will have to make decisions that impact on both sides. And the second aspect is that he needs to be a bit schizophrenic. He needs to think business, and he needs to think open source community, and he needs to kind of think about both of them separately. He cannot join them completely, because you're not talking business, you're not talking business model in your community. You're talking about what you're building, and so the product manager, he needs to work there. And so well, at XWiki we didn't always have one person that would do both. For example, our CTO is the community leader, the clear community leader. It's the CTO, but he needs to be a product manager. If he's not a product manager, if he's not strongly involved in the business model of the company, he's going to just work on the code, and he's not going to think about what needs to be done and things like that. So, and I was more the one driving the business side initially, but I'm also very involved in open source. If I'm not, you get a split, and if you get a split, that's not good. So you need to work on both sides of the fence. You need to work on open source on the product, and you need to work on the business model. If you split, at some point you're going to say, well, why am I doing this open source code? if the business doesn't get involved in the open source part. So the business needs to get involved in the open source part, and the open source part needs to be aware that the business is necessary for there to continue to exist. And so you need to have the product manager work on both sides of things at the same time. For example, at XWiki, we for example, when we think about the roadmap, we involve all teams of the company to decide what do we want to do, and then we bring it to the community. We bring that, and then we discuss it in the community, and that's what our CTO is doing. So first we discuss internally what do we want to invest on our resources, so our team, and we bring it to the community so that the community can also participate and extend the work. So you have this double work that you need to do, which is not always simple. It's not a simple process.
Okay, so you really need to combine the same efforts into the commercial product and what you would call the community code. Has to be, yes.
I think that is very interesting.
Gabriele.
I think the role of the product manager in the chain from code to product. I usually, speaking of open source, I usually the metaphor of the game, like a soccer game, a football game, a volleyball game. So usually you have something you want to achieve to win the European Championship, the World Championships, the national, or just to stay in the major league. I don't know. You have a goal, you have the user, and like a normal team, you must have the trainer, the manager of the team. And he has to look at the capability of his team. You have a core team, but you have a broader team, the community. So you have emphasize your qualities, recover the defects, solve the issues. That's the role. It's a different role of a traditional. I'm a system integrator, so I know what's the project manager in a traditional company. It's a little bit different from the traditional project manager role. It's a bigger, larger role because you must balance different levels of performance, but you have your goal in the mind. And like the modern teams, you are not alone. You need the assistants, the second trainer, if you look at the major teams, or you have some specialized in communication, because doesn't exist a product manager that can do everything. You need some assistant to help you, but with the role of balance to emphasize your qualities and recover defects, looking at the broader community. Of course, you have a core team, and you have to rely on this. I don't know, I'm interested if you have a different experience.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly comment, if you don't mind. You mentioned earlier that, hey, many open source software projects don't necessarily have a product manager, but I would view product manager as a role, not necessarily a title. As long as there is someone whose job is to focus on who are the users, what do they need, how can we ensure that we get the users what they need. I don't care if they're actually called a product manager or someone else. There are many people called release managers or perhaps the project manager and so on, depending on that project. As long as they're focusing on what are the users, what do they need, how can we make sure they get that, including the documentation, assurance that the testing has been achieved, and many other things that we've discussed here, then great. And if they're not meeting the user needs, well, that's a problem. We need to fix that.
So right. So in community management, since development, since the contributors, also the users, they can also, it means what you're saying is that the role, the function of product management is not identified under one hat, but it's probably spread out throughout. Everyone is a little bit of a product manager.
It could be. I don't have any trouble with it being a single person. In fact, often it's helpful to have someone at least looking at it and say, we need this, we have a problem in this area, and helping people point towards and improving that area. But I just would not want to get hung up on that particular phrase. It's the importance is the role being performed. I
think Roger wanted to add something.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. First, I think we need to be careful when using product manager because we can also say product owner, but it's the same thing. For me, we're talking about open source. So traction, community traction, right? So I think it's important to define if you are targeting B2B or B2C.
Yes.
So if you're building B2C code, you can have a big, great product manager. You don't have any guarantees that you're going to have traction. So, and I like what you said. We need to, the product owner or product manager need to have a kind of visibility, understanding of the market is targeting. So I think having contact with analysts is great, because at the end you put code on public, and you're expecting people in B2C to come and to say, oh, yes, great, I want to contribute. But you don't have no guarantee about this. So now, if we move to B2B, it's definitely different, because you're targeting business, so you don't need traction. Basically, you don't need to have a huge number of contributors to make business, right? So you more care about your product. So in this case, it's more product management. You need to define a roadmap and quality and so on. So basically, your core contributors are your employees. There are no people around. So that was very important when you talk about product manager or product owner, about what are you targeting, B2B or B2C? And then you define your roadmap, and it's a different story.
Great. You want to add something? I'm curious to understand if at Kubernetes, because you're the one who really mentioned product management, and if product management came before or after, what was the role in, is product management a consequence of having something that seems to be working, and then you say, oh, we need to bring a little bit of structure to that, and let's hire somebody and give him the title of, or her the title of product manager. Did it come before or after? Chicken or egg?
There's a couple of different industry ways to think about this. Like, to everything that was said, like, when you have a product manager, generally that is a person who has the authority to tell people what to build. And that's like at Microsoft, I think they call program managers. So the company decides, I want this to exist, or this is the goal I want to meet. And then to do that, then they go and say, hey, programmers, go make this happen. And at Google, traditionally, it's been a little bit more engineering-led, so people will just build things, and then if a team gets traction behind wanting to do something, then they'll bring in the product person to help sort of shape that. But a lot of what we have is, we have this cool internal technology. How do we turn this into being something external-facing? In the open source world, to what Roger just said, the question is, do you have people you can control and have them build what you want? And generally that's because you pay them somehow. And if you are a company that says, like, this release will have these things in it, then either you need to pay the people to build them, or hope that all the individual contributors are going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to work on that because I want to. And that's when it becomes more of a community task of saying, well, is there alignment? Do I have, if I say these things, will people build them? And you get BDFL kind of figures who are able to be sort of an endpoint for escalation, or you have like councils of elders or technical advisory boards or something. But ultimately, it's a little bit like a film director. It's, if you have someone who says, this is my vision, this is what I want, then you need to have people that you can pay to build that for you in whatever currency. Or you can shepherd what people do, and then hope that, like, you can just say, well, this release, because this person was interested in this, that's what we built. And the distinction, I think, will be very different depending on if you have paid contributors or not.
Thank you. I have the feeling that we've been threading onto forbidden grounds by talking so much about product management, product marketing in a conference which is open source and technical. So maybe some people say, well, what are they talking about? I mean, more talk about technology and code. Do we have? I mean, we have 10 minutes left, and there is one thing I would like to know. So think about it while they ask questions. What can be the role of an open source organization like OW2 to support the market readiness of their project? That's something we have a vested interest here. This is why you're here sitting, and we're asking you this kind of questions. We want to improve what is OW2, and we want to improve our project, help our project. Do we have questions while you think about this one? Do we have questions from the room, please? And we should have a microphone. The flying microphone is... there it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Does it work? Yes. Nicolas Verité, product owner for MongoZM by Airline Solutions and also president of linuxfr.org, the best website in the world. So I've heard interesting things, but not so much about sales. And how does the communities that you address link with sales? Because they contribute to the influences in the buying process. So they are part of the pipeline. Is that true or not?
So how the community helps build sales, really? Well, who wants to take this one?
Can take. For me, there is different way where the community will help, and it depends also the software. Let's say, if the software it's let's say for end users, the community can give feedback. It's first very valuable. Second, can test the software, report bugs, and for me that can be let's say very big benefits. I don't think any open source product need, let's say, a lot of contributor, a lot of code, a lot of feature developed by the community. Sometimes only having feedback and bug report can be a great help, let's say. For sure, the company should have some power and should have some developers that will develop the product, but in this case, it can be enough. On other case, the community can also develop some, let's say, specific use cases, specific, let's say, connector depending to their own use case, and we will be able, let's say, to extend the core values that the company bring to the open source product. So the company focus on really the core features, and community can build on top of that a lot of extension. So for me, there is multiple answer. What is very important is when Ludovic says product manager should take care about both community and business and paying user. For me, it's very important because there is some company where, and I think it's a big mistake, when they want monetize, they want that, let's say, push a lot of the business because it's the business that will, let's say, be the growth of the company. And year after year, they remove some feature from the community and put this on the enterprise to have more and more users. At the end, in fact, the community will left or will fork the product. The community will die, or they will not, and they will not have any benefits from the community. At the end, in fact, the open source product will become, let's say, a trial product. With the community product, you will not be able to go on production, and you will not be able, let's say, to use it. So I think it's very, let's say, important to take care to the community if you want also have some benefits from it.
Thank you. Roger? A quick one now, we have to wrap up.
Just to make this clear, it's time to understand that people who contribute most of the time are working for a company. I don't believe that people who contribute on open source are individuals who are just, okay, I have some spare time and want to code from this one. If you do that, it's because you have some purpose for that. But most of contributors today are paid employees from companies who have interest to contribute. That's why I believe that if you talk about B2C, it's different. Even in B2C, you most of the time you have a core team who have a company beyond this. It's finished. I think it's time to think that I've started open source in 1995, and I was like, oh, individual people contributing because they like open source, they want to bring stuff to humanity. Now, I think it's time to understand that it's business. Even if it's a B2C, it's business. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, a final word. Now we'll start with Ludovic and then Gabriele. And Ludovic, maybe the role, what can OW2 do if you have some
what could OW2
advice for us?
So first, maybe I'd like just to say one more thing that was not said. I mean, you have three types of community. You have the contributors, you have the technical aware people, and then you have users. So actually, the users, they're both they're a bit dangerous when they're community, because they're not experienced, and they give you a lot of information, but they also try to ask you for stuff for free a lot, and they can be dangerous. So you need to identify people that don't understand that your time is not free, and they also need to bring you value if they want you to bring them value. So so sometimes they can be dangerous. At the same time, they're potentially your clients. So it's a complicated thing. But actually, the most interesting people are the technical non-contributors, these technical community, because they're your pre-sales actually. So they're the people that will bring your software inside companies where it's difficult to get in. They will not bring you money initially, but they can bring you money on the long term. So they're actually putting seeds in some places. And so we had some cases, for example, a bank putting XWiki and bought support 3 years later when the guy left. When the guy was still there, he was doing the support. They didn't need any support. But when he was gone, the people that were there, they were lost with the software. They needed support. So they're your seeds for the future, and they're also the people that will make your software known. They will identify the right software that the company should use, and then maybe they will give it to the business guy, and the business guy will say, well, I cannot put this without proper support. Maybe he will say, well, if we can do everything for free, great, let's do it. And then you won't do business. But if he says, well, I need proper support to do this, he will call the company and say, okay, how can we work together? And then you will do business. So they're your pre-sales, they're your evaluators, they bring a lot of value from the sales and marketing process. But it's not fast. It takes time for the seeds to transform into business. Now, what could OW2 do? Well, I think on the product side, well, maybe make users meet with a software provider and make more contact between users and the company's coding and bringing software. OW2 is already helping making the market aware of open source and presenting companies, but maybe more meetings could be interesting on vertical subjects.
Thank you. Gabriele.
Just one aspect about community. Community give reputation to projects. Just to say what my colleagues do in my company, when they have to make the choice of open source project, they look at who is behind the project. Apache, comfortable. Google, comfortable. OpenStack, comfortable. Eclipse, could be. OW2, could be. So they add reputation to the project. In this sense, it's a very important process that is hidden for the end user. You can, looking at OW2, if you want to enter OW2, you submit a project, but it's not automatic. There is a process to be accepted inside the community. That's why community give reputation and add tools like governance, like quality, best practice, and something else. So it's an important aspect that community give reputation to the project. Sometimes for little companies, not automatic go to the business if they do it alone.
David.
If I may make a few general comments. First of all, if you know, I would like to respectfully disagree, but not that strongly. There are absolutely people who are not paid, and contribute to various projects. On the other hand, for many projects, they're the vast minority. I remember seeing a study, this was quite a while back, but it was the Apache server. They had 1,000 contributors, one of them was unpaid. So, okay, so they exist, but for many projects, they're a vanishingly small minority. Now, for some other projects, it's a larger percentage. But that said, a vast number of developers today are paid to develop software that's released as open source. That's a good thing. I do not think that open source software by itself is a business model. It is a licensing model and a way of collaborating. There are many different kinds of business models that people have applied, and it's okay. But they're different between different projects because different projects meet different needs, have different kinds of users. But whatever it is, if it's not working, then they need to change it until it is working. And so hopefully, and so I would advocate for is if what you're doing right now isn't working, look for something else that is. There are many examples of many different ways to approach the problem of making it something long-term supportable, and there are ways to solve it.
Thank you. Cedric, anything? Oh, you got Roger, last word?
So thanks for this one. I have a chance to be advisor for 2 open source projects. One is VLC, the guys beyond VLC. So you guys know about VLC, right? And I have another one with Wakanda, is open source B2B, and VLC is open source B2C. So, and it's quite interesting to look about this because when I look about VLC, the core contributor, only one guy in pay, actually. The other guys are working for Video Labs, who's the company beyond VLC. And from Wakanda, 100% of the contributors are employees. So now the question is about the business. They have the same challenge to make interaction on the community. Are you right? It's community first. So, but at the end, as a B2B, you need to make money somewhere. Even on B2C, because the company beyond the B2C need to be sustainable. So some ways they need also to think about, okay, guys, we need to make money to be able to keep going. So I have a talk this afternoon about these 2 models because it's quite challenging today to lead between a B2B startup, a B2B company, and a B2C open source company. So they have different challenges, but at the end, they need to be community traction. That is the key. If you don't have community, if you don't have traction,
okay.
Except if you are Spago BI, a company who already have a customer base. But at the beginning, I'm quite sure when Spago BI or Bonita start many, many years ago, the first focus was about community.
Thank you. Craig, final word about what an organization like OW2 can bring to productization.
Yeah, given everything we've just heard there, I think the people will individually contribute to open source if it's something that they use themselves. I don't think very many people are going to wake up and say, I'm going to go hack on whatever project today. That they just, maybe as a programming challenge, but nothing else. So if you have a large audience of people, then a certain percentage of them may get involved. And projects I've been involved with in the past are things that I used and they didn't work properly. And so I would try and fix them, and around the edges, maybe more about packaging and so on. One final piece is that I used to go to a Linux users group I was involved with, which would have been 15 years ago-ish time frame now, and it was back then, it's like, let's all learn how to compile a kernel. And what you get from that group changes over time, and we found with, like, I don't really know, I think meetups are the new Linux users groups, but we found that very soon you'd get the people who were paid to do the stuff for work, knew all the, what I call the 101 level stuff, and then there were the old guys who were like, I've just learned about computers and I don't want to pay Bill Gates. And those people need to have introductory things, and you need the people from the first group to train the people from the second group. But if you just get them to keep doing that introductory stuff, then they will drop off. So your bar keeps moving, what you need to do keeps changing, and my only suggestion would be think of how you can fit both groups, possibly by running 2 different streams for things, because one stream will never fit new people and advanced people and keep them both engaged.
Good, thank you very much. So thank you, speakers.